Hey there. This is a collective reading that I'm putting out just because it feels right. Um, I am recording this a few hours before the new moon on January 18th, kind of guiding us into a new lunar month. A very interesting lunar month, given that the synod or the moment of the conjunction between the sun and the moon are also taking place within a few degrees of both Venus to the east and then Mars and Mercury to the west. Mars and Mercury also conjoining one another today, basically at the same time. And I believe at the time of me recording this, Mercury's already overtaken Mars a little bit. So it's interesting because Chinese astronomy, astrology associates Mars with fire and Mercury with water. And the fact that they're conjoining within that context very much sort of conveys the tensions that are present right now. Very opposing viewpoints where one wants to progress forward with passion, with industry, wants to shape the world and overtake it, dominate it, to some extent to spread control, as if a fire spreading like a wildfire. And then the other kind of wants to sit still and be silent and integrate and connect with a spiritual reality, a more compassionate reality. And you know, it's obviously more complicated than that. It's very easy for us to kind of categorize things as very black and white when there's a lot of complexity, a lot of nuance. People have very different opinions about how things should be moving forward. And each viewpoint offers something, I think, crucial to the entire patchwork quilt of the human experience and of the future that is before us. I was kind of drawing cards as I was contemplating this geometry that's taking place right now, and the first card that came through, it actually fell out of the deck, was the Ace of Cups. And I think it's interesting because looking at the alignment of how the planets are right now, so an ecliptic declination and equatorial declination. The moment that I'm recording this, Mars is slightly above where Mercury is, and Mercury is slightly above the moon in declination and altitude, however you want to think about it. And both the moon and Mercury are associated with the water phase within the Chinese metaphysical cosmology. And there's very much like this sense of like upwelling of a spring sort of bursting forth, and maybe that sort of that imagery of the water coming upwards is very much conveyed by Mars being right there at the top, this kind of very driven, young, active, outward expressing sort of energy, where maybe information is very much coming up from the depths of our psyches, where we're sort of intuiting the correct courses of action or the correct perspectives to have on the situation that's before us. But it's like we don't get there without that moment of stillness, without that moment of realignment, of sitting within and allowing our sort of mental chatter and our identifications with outside influences that might seem like they're inside influences, the voices in our head that are kind of inherited by programming that we've taken on as a result of whatever we're being exposed to, whatever we're interacting with, whoever or whatever we're interacting with. When we kind of take a moment to step away from that and to stop getting very attached to it, stop identifying with it, in that moment of in between is where things sort of come up effortlessly. by silencing our analysis of the circumstances and just allowing things to spontaneously arise in our attention. I feel like that's where the medicine of this lunar month is going to be. We have the Eight of Cups in reverse and the Seven of Swords in reverse on either side of this Ace of Cups. And I think that's interesting because to me, those two cards sort of convey this sense of people sneaking away, of trying to hide, of trying to leave behind a situation that they've created without being noticed. Like somebody or some party, some group of people. And I say that because we also have the Three of Cups down underneath the Eight of Cups in reverse. It's very much to me like I'm trying to illustrate it with allegory, and I think the best way to put it is like there's a company that built a factory on the side of a river, and they were dumping their waste products into this river, and it was polluting the river. And then information about this sort of came to the surface, you know, was brought to awareness, was brought to light. But this had been going on for a long time. Like, it wasn't anything new. It was calculated, it was planned, everything was put in order, everything was already within awareness, but it was like an isolated group of people who knew about it. It was kept secret, it was kept hidden. You know, under the guise of this Eight of Coins here, I feel like it's all in the name of progress, like human improvement. It's for the betterment of human society. It's for the betterment of X, Y, or Z. And I feel like we're very much coming to a close of that paradigm of progress for the sake of progress, of hustling and bustling and working towards pre-established goals. You know, for us in the States, it's like working towards the American dream. Like, these are not new concepts to us, and even this idea of kind of rejecting these notions is not new, but I feel like it's reaching a culmination point within a global society, because there's a lot of movement right now happening collectively. Like, these changes in consciousness are not isolated to local areas, whether those are towns, counties, states, countries, regions. Like, I think by virtue of the digital age, of the internet connecting people all over the world, being immediately available with one another no matter where we are in space and time, it's very much not generalized. The change, the energy has been made more diffuse and more immediately available across a wider population, if that makes sense. And so this could be a moment of questioning the paradigm that we've been inhabiting, of realizing that governance is, as we have known it in all its different shapes and forms that it's taken up until this point, whether that's through monarchy, democracy, communism, or at least attempts to, you know, operate under an umbrella of any of those sort of systems. And obviously there's more systems of governance than just those three, but you know, it's like within the context of this digital age, we need something different. You know, the borders between countries essentially no longer exist, beyond an imagined realm. Like the internet has sort of destroyed the boundaries that we've created amongst ourselves, and that's creating a whole new slew of problems to deal with, but it's also providing opportunity for different solutions than we've utilized in the past. We have the 10 of coins in reverse underneath the 7 of swords, and I think this is the collective sneaking around of so-called people in power is a reflection of our own sneaking around, of our own denial and rejection of our natural states of being. Of what's coming to mind right now is this anxiety that I'm familiar with, and maybe some of you guys are familiar with, of if I'm home alone, relaxing, enjoying myself, doing what I love, whether that's reading, drawing, or reading tarot cards, examining the astrology of a particular moment, or looking at charts or whatever, and I'm enjoying myself, the minute somebody comes home, and I hear that doorknob moving, I panic. I have to be doing something. I gotta go start cleaning the kitchen, or I gotta go start cleaning some totally arbitrary thing, and appear busy. And it's like probably rooted in childhood stuff, and I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with that feeling, but it's this denial of a state of ease because we feel like we always have to be working, producing, being productive, being a cog in some machine, and ensuring that there is an end result of an apparent end result, something that's manifested as a result of the time that we've spent doing something. Like we have to be getting somewhere, we have to have a goal in mind, we have to achieve it, we have to work towards it. And it's like, you would think with all of the innovations that have come about within the last few centuries within human history, that life would have become easier, that we would have streamlined the human experience so that there is more time for us to enjoy moments of leisure, or to study, to learn, to innovate even more. But something about the old paradigm, the old power matrix that's been superimposed over the individual and collective experience has just made it more difficult for us to tap into those moments of leisure, those moments of ease, that freedom to engage with the moment as we see fit, as spontaneously arises within our consciousness, within our individual subjective experiences. Because we have bills to pay, we have taxes to pay on top of those bills, we have to support ourselves, to support our families, to do these things. And it's like there is so much opportunity for us to utilize the technology that we've created for ourselves so that we don't have to be worrying about those things. And maybe that's kind of something that's being called into question by this sort of giant paradigm shift that's happening right now. The advent of this digital age of so-called artificial intelligence, there's a lot of the old age that's going to be very quickly replaced, and we're going to watch this happen before our eyes. And it's not going to be easy. We have the Tower card here in reverse. This is the card of Mars. This is the card of upheaval, of so-called chaos, breakdown, collapse, disintegration. But what I'm seeing specifically is like a pilot landing a plane. Like, yeah, there's a lot of forces of chaos, there's a lot of resistance, there's a lot of tension, within the aerodynamics. I don't want to get into the specifics of all that because I don't know the rhetoric for describing that. But there's a lot of moving pieces and parts and intricacies and geometry and speed, velocity, all that sort of thing, with ensuring a smooth and successful landing of an aircraft. Any slight miscalculation can totally, leave you kind of throw you to the whims of chaos and then cause trouble. But it's like, we don't have to have this sort of violent breakdown of things. There's everything available to us now to where we can calculate the descent, calculate the breakdown, so that there's less fallout, there's less wastage. Instead of having a giant, lead weight swing and break a building down, to make room for a new building, it's like there's a careful harvesting of all the pieces and parts of this building so that they can be repurposed into something that functions more efficiently, maybe that is more aesthetically appreciated, whatever the purpose is. It's to serve the new perspective of reality, the new perception that we have of what reality should be and look like. And I think that's very much hinged on our individual approaches to this larger situation that we find ourselves in, because there's a lot of different storylines playing out in our individual lives, but there's also a collective thread of experience and cultural shift and ideological shift, that's sort of all pervading and is very much infiltrating, if you want to use that language, but is very much a part of our individual lives, whether or not we want it to be, to kind of do away with the notion that, I'm going to be off the grid, I'm not going to read the news, I'm not going to do X, Y, or Z, I'm not going to involve myself in the happenings of society. But those things still affect you, even if you're not aware of them. It's the membrane that you build your life upon, the shape of it, the color of it, it's all outside of your control. You can only do what's within your power to create what it is that you want around you, but you're still affected by these outside, larger, more all-pervasive energies of the culture that you're a part of the country that you live in, the region that you live in. It's like the weather. You can't control it, but it affects you. It's beyond your individual capacities, and yet is immediately affectatious on how you live your life, whether that's a conscious or unconscious process, whatever. Knight of Pentacles in reverse over here, kind of bringing us out of this Eight of Cups and this Three of Cups energy. Kind of, there's this gravity sort of taking us that way, and because of the way that I'm oriented, that's actually towards the east direction. But I think it's interesting because when I first saw these two cards, specifically the Eight of Cups and the Three of Cups in reverse, in the way that they're kind of interacting with one another, the sort of phrase that was coming to mind was like this ritualistic breakdown, or this honoring the ending ritualistically. And I guess I can kind of relate that to the fact that this is the last lunar month of the Chinese calendar. Because around February 4th, I think it is when the sun crosses that 15-degree point of Aquarius, that exact midpoint between the southern Capricorn solstice and the eastern Aries equinox. That's the point. When the sun traverses over that point is when the Chinese calendar acknowledges a new solar year, And then the lunation that takes place closest to that is usually the first lunar month. So this is the 12th and final lunar month of this particular year before we start the next and move towards that big conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, you know. But yeah, this notion of like ritualistic breakdown of honoring the moment that we're in, of providing it with some sort of sacred acknowledgement as opposed to just letting it slip by and being, you know, another moment within a string of moments that's easily ignored, easily forgotten. Sorry, give me 1 second. I wanted to pull that up. Okay. I think this is also further emphasis on this mindfulness that I was sort of alluding to when I was talking about a very conscious breakdown, you know, being aware of and repurposing the parts of the building as opposed to just sort of mindlessly destroying it and letting the pieces fall where they may. I feel like that notion is also part of the old paradigm, this sort of mindless destruction of whatever came before, this conquest, this need to superimpose something new, something more, something better, you know, this superimposition of forms to uphold this illusion of power that no longer exists, or that is no longer accessible within the age that we live in now, where everything is very diffuse, everything is very decentralized. You know, we still have these idols, these people that we place within some hierarchy of sorts, you know, kind of depending on what sphere they inhabit, whether it's the political sphere or the entertainment sphere, whatever. There's different hierarchies, and we have these people on these pedestals at different levels depending on where they fall with subjective, or I guess you could say objective, judgments. But it's like I feel like that's echoes of an older paradigm. You know, a lot of the rhetoric that's coming out in the last few years especially is very much on this idea of decentralization, of rejection of centralized authority, centralized power, rejection of hierarchy. You know, there is natural hierarchy, of course, but I think we've been around long enough to see that within human society it's very dangerous to have power centralized and contained within any one person or any one political party, any one family, even any one ideology or religion. Like, it's very dangerous to do that and to say that this person or this group of people, they have an authority that we can't question, or, you know, whatever the case may be. I feel like we're very much entering into a world where every individual is valued equally, and though each individual has different capacities and different offerings for the collective society as a whole, like we all have our innate propensities, our skills and interests and things like that, I feel like in the world that we're inhabiting right now, we're very much like pushed to fit into certain things regardless of our natural skills, propensities, interests, that sort of things. Just so we can be, you know, productive members of human society. You know, I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm not very smart. I don't know where this is all going. This is just kind of where the pieces are. This is what I'm feeling. where we go from here is very much determined by the choices that we make on an individual subjective level within our own lives. And those changes are going to be reflected in the world around us. By exercising mindfulness on an individual level, it's fostering mindfulness collectively. By being more deliberate with our choices and being more deliberate with the things we integrate and the things that we don't, about the things that we create, whether those are, physical things or relationships or ideas, being present through it all and being careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to old concepts, like taking what works and repurposing what doesn't, instead of, trashing what doesn't. Or instead of saying, yeah, no, that doesn't work, so we're just not going to use it. We're just going to forget it ever happened and move on and put something new over top of it. Like, I don't think that's the correct way to go about doing these things. Every piece needs to be accounted for, needs to be acknowledged in some way, needs to be integrated in some way, because it offers something of value to what's unfolding. It offers something of value to the world that we're creating. And I think fundamentally there's also this other, kind of going back to the dynamic between fire and water, between Mars and Mercury conjunction today. Like, don't be so quick to divide amongst yourselves or to judge something or someone as good or bad because of X, Y, or Z, whatever factors are in place that you use as a criteria for judgment. Like, that isn't going to move anything forward either. That's a function of the old paradigm once again. And though that sort of distinguishment, that power of discernment is useful and does serve a purpose within this world, I feel like that's misusing it, if that makes sense. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to say. I don't think so. There's a storm blowing in right now, so this was like a little moment of quiet. Maybe that's what this month is. This is the moment of quiet before the big transformations take place, because it'll be next lunar month that the actual conjunction between Saturn and Neptune takes place, and a lot of the other more momentous geometry starts popping off. This very much feels like the quiet, the calm before the storm stirs up the energies and gets us moving in a particular direction. And I feel like this is the month where we set our sights on what direction it is that we're going, because we have this space to sit back and breathe and think and consider and reflect, which is very watery, very mercurial. Okay. I think that's where I'm going to leave it today. So I'll do my best to get some readings out for each of the signs, but I feel like sometimes it's easier to just step back and let things come when they're ready to come out. Anyway, I'm wishing you all the best. Stay sane out there. Take a breath. Consider before you act, before you speak, of course. And be well.